Beautiful like a fresco and fascinating for its idiosyncrasies, Street Fighter III Third Strike is a melting pot of both popular culture and fighting game design. This is the Annotated Third Strike. Of the Street Fighter III cast, Urian, if you excuse the pun, is the butt of most jokes. His most obvious visual trait is that he's mostly naked, and save for a loincloth and jewel affixed to his forehead, an outsider looking in will probably think that this screaming, cackling guy fighting au naturel is flat-out lazy design. Given he's something of a sprite alteration from series antagonist Gil, seems to mount more evidence that Capcom's venerable design team just phoned this one in. But you would be wrong. Subtly placed in Urian's relatively simple design are nuances and complexities that richly texture this character, and were obviously done with knowing intent. From the tips of his hair to the toes on his feet, Urien is a fascinating piece of design, with gameplay to match. What I suppose I'm saying then, is that if there's a thesis statement for this video series, it is Urien. Urien simply is a man out of time. He's an amalgamation of various bits and pieces of our own world's antiquity, and is perhaps both the real antagonist and unwitting hero of the Street Fighter III series when we consider all of the angles. He's also our first encounter in the series with the Street Fighter franchise's recurring themes of brotherhood, rivalry, and duality. What we know from official supplemental material like Street Fighter Eternal Challenge is that Urien is the younger brother of Gil, and not only was he brought up within the ranks of the secret Illuminati society that his sibling leads, but he's also second in command. It seems as though his sadistic personality became apparent at a young age, forcing whomever his predecessors were to appoint Gil in a leadership role above him, though they trained in similar methods and are supposedly equal in power. In fact, early design sketches show a similar dual color motif to Urien that Gil sports. This has eaten at Urien his entire life, and he schemed against Gil to usurp him before losing his patience in favor of an open challenge, leading to Urien's first appearance in the series' Second Impact, though it doesn't work out for him given his ending in that game. It seems that the second time is the charm though, as his ending in Third Strike shows him not only finally killing and recuperating Gil, but also the remains of 2,000 years worth of Illuminati knowledge and artifacts, effectively destroying everything that the group has worked 2 millennia for in service of his own ego. This ending has a lot to unpack, and this is where we'll begin to dig into his design. We'll see this more in the upcoming video for Gil, but what we can extrapolate from this ending is that the Illuminati has been quietly operating for a very long time, something corroborated in Eternal Challenge, which also mentions their positions as silent shepherds of humanity. The two brothers were products of this hidden society, and their ultimate goal being the formation of a utopian world by the year 2200. Indeed, the structure of the building and its desert location here indicates its age and seclusion, possibly being inspired by the biblical Tower of Babel from the Book of Genesis. In this story, a post-flood humanity bands together to build a city tall enough to reach heaven until God confounds their speech so they can no longer understand each other, putting a kibosh on the whole affair. Some scholars believe that this structure may have actually been attempted in ancient civilizations, but artistic depictions of the tower over the centuries are enough to find the potential inspiration for this ending sequence. His Second Impact ending is telling for other reasons though. Combined with what we'll later find in the upcoming video for 12, we know that Urien is either the mastermind or at least the chief lieutenant for the G Project with his army of Necro clones behind him in that game's ending. Though certainly emotionally unstable, as Eternal Challenge points out, Urien is highly intelligent and is the father of whatever super soldier program that the Illuminati has in mind. This is further illustrated, though quietly, in his rival fight in Third Strike against Necro, though they do not share any pre-match dialogue. So while he destroyed the secret organization in the Third Strike ending for his own selfish ends, without him their plans for violent domination may not have been where we see them. What's interesting here is that while the Street Fighter III games certainly provide the player with an end boss in Gil, he's depicted as aloof and largely disinterested, effectively lacking these games the cackling, almost comically evil monster the overall series had with the Dictator from Street Fighter II. Urien is a closer facsimile to Bison Vega, but while he may seem to want world domination, his relationship with Gil, clearly illustrated in their pre-boss dialogue, dictates that he's doing it less for control and more for completely selfish and, again, egotistic reasons. Back to the elements of his design, though, and addressing his nearly naked frame is the most obvious place to start. But I mentioned earlier that Urien is a man out of time, which is interesting to consider when digging through official source material since the Third Strike team, according to a GameMist interview translated by Schmuplations, did away with official birthdays for the cast of the Street Fighter III games. This certainly makes things convenient for characters like Ryu, whose official Street Fighter II birthday was July 21st, 1964, making him over 50 years old at this point. In Urien and Gil's case, though, their obvious connections to the ancient world makes you wonder if they age at all and have been struggling with each other for millennia. So, okay, let's finally get to the nakedness, which I contend he would have truly been if the designers had their way with it. Urien is the perfect form of man, tall, statuesque, and muscular. As he and his brother liken themselves unto gods, it's not much of a leap to infer that Urien strives to be the Greco-Roman god to that end. In fact, in ancient Greece during the earliest Olympic Games before the modern era, competitors, particularly Greco-Roman wrestlers, would fight naked and often oiled, a practice predating modern Turkish oil wrestling. One of Urien's fight intros shows him burning away a business suit and tanning his once normal skin tone, which may be a reference to this. However, that's not a tan at all, but a coating of what is probably bronze metal. As Gil had mastered the elements of fire and ice, Urien learned to control electricity and metal, as we'll further see in a moment. This alludes to the Age of Bronze, which historians use as a shorthand to refer to the periods between 3300 and 1200 BCE. This is not only when the use of bronze as a metal was employed for various purposes from civilian and military life, but also when some ancient civilizations were hitting certain period zeniths, such as the Greeks, Mesopotamians, and Egyptians. Urien, then, is the perfect bronze statue. If any more proof of this is needed, just listen to the sound emitted when he blocks an attack, which is different than any other blocking sound effect in the game, implying that fighters are making contact with a substance that's not muscle or fabric. Next, take into account the names of his special moves and super arts. The chariot tackle refers to the sport of chariot racing, which historians liken in importance and influence to modern-day professional football. It was a cultural mainstay in ancient Greece as well as the Roman and Byzantine empires. The Tyrant Slaughterer is actually the Tyrant Punisher in the Japanese version of the game. A name one can hear voice actor Lawrence Bain, taking over for Yoji Ueda in Second Impact, still speaks if you listen closely enough. While there's no direct connection to anyone in particular with this, history has proven many Roman leaders like the infamous Caligula to be quite tyrannical in their time. His most famous move is the Aegis Reflector. An aegis is a word from Greek and Roman myth first found in Homer's Iliad that refers to a sort of divine protection, and is often depicted in art and cultures as a type of shield or defensive source. The god Zeus and his daughter, the goddess Athena, would wield it. Most interesting of all is another connection to Zeus, or at least his Roman counterpart, with the temporal thunder. In the Japanese version of the game, this move is called the Jupiter Thunder, a reference to the head of the Roman pantheon, Jupiter, and his role as the god of thunder. Again, the voice actor calls out this move by name if you listen closely, but he says Yupitel, which is a mis-anglicized reading of the Japanese word for Jupiter, Yupiteru. The second volume of the Third Strike game, Mu, corroborates this. Briefly, the Zeus-Jupiter connections are fitting for Urien as they were both leaders prone to rash, often violent behavior that one might call unbecoming of a person in their role. And yes, I did mention his hair at the top of this video, because that particular style of short, naturally curly hair combed forward had briefly regained popularity in the late 1990s. It's called the Caesar. But while the Greco-Roman allusions are the most obvious, those are certainly not where the connections to ancient civilizations end. His second impact stage takes place in Egypt, in the ruins of what was probably a great city buried and destroyed over time. Certainly, ancient Egypt has captured the imagination of modern people before archaeologists had begun excavating their remains. Their long-dead polytheistic religion, villainous inclusion in the Old Testament, and our own continuous discoveries of hidden artifacts makes for a fascinating potential connection to a character like this, especially given that ancient Egypt's penchant for slavery and Urian's apparent interest in it. More interesting is that he moves locations during the year-long gap between Second Impact and Third Strike to an Olmec ruin in what would now be either the Veracruz or Tabasco states of Mexico. Research on Olmec society points to it as the earliest Mesoamerican civilization flourishing between 1500 and 400 BCE, picking up just about when the Age of Bronze had ended. According to sources on Wikipedia, the Olmecs practiced ritual bloodletting, which I only point out because Urien has one of the few regional differences in the game. His time over loss animation on Japanese Third Strike boards show him not only shaking in shame and anger, but piercing his own side to the point of bleeding. Many fans speculate that this is an outcome of his own unstable nature, but might be yet another callback to ancient ways of bleeding to heal, or perhaps more bleakly self-sacrifice. Again, the change of location may be significant. The Illuminati has clearly operated for millennia, and it won't take much to infer from these stages that they certainly had influence over several different locations and eras of our own history. The jewel on his forehead is also worth discussion. It represents the ambiguous concept of the third eye, or mind's eye. This refers to not only certain inner enlightenment, but according to many Central and East Asian religions such as Hinduism, Chinese Taoism, and Japanese Zen, is the manifestation upon one's forehead of many things, ranging from higher consciousness to precognition. In appearance, it's an effective way of displaying his, and by proxy his brother Gil's, spirituality, or more likely some other buried narrative connection to their young lives in Illuminati training. But here we are again referring to a different region of the world's ancient history. Not only is Urien and his secret society well traveled, their influence abounds. Tying all three subjects of antiquity, legend, and religion is his name. Urien Reged was the name of an early British king of the 6th century who controlled a region in what is now southern Scotland. According to Wikipedia, his genealogy makes him the first recorded post-Roman military leader in the area of Hadrian's Wall in northern England. He was assassinated during his military conquest of the region after allying with other leaders, and the Welsh Triads, a medieval Welsh manuscript that preserves the region's folklore and legends, refers to him as one of the 3 great battle leaders of Britain. He was assumed into Arthurian legend sometime after his death, no doubt due to his military exploits. He rebelled and battled with Arthur, but over time became a trusted ally, eventually marrying Morgan Le Fay, whom would become Arthur's ultimate foil. Various tellings of the story, including Thomas Mallory's and La Morte d'Arthur, end his tale in different ways, such as Le Fay slaying him, bearing him a famous son named Owain, or Owain himself being born a bastard. Urien, though, is a common alternate spelling of Uriel, one of the 7 biblical archangels. The name translates from Hebrew to God is my light, or the light of God, which makes sense given his association with the sun in Jewish Kabbalah and some Christian traditions. He's mentioned in many ancient texts that have not been accepted into Catholic canon, like his comrades Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael, but features heavily in the Apocrypha, specifically the Book of Enoch. He takes part in quite a few important Old Testament events, including being the possible angel of death during the Egyptian plagues, the angel that guards the gates of Eden with a fiery sword, who, quote, watches over thunder and terror, and the angel that holds the key to the pit, that's pit with a capital P, during the end times. It's not a one-to-one comparison to say that this Urien is the angel Urien, but some of the imagery does connect with his allusions to Jupiter and Zeus, whom were also gods of thunder and terror. As we move on to his gameplay and moveset, it's interesting to point out that Urien has no special match intro with any other character. He's definitely not the only cast member in the game to have this distinction, but he is one of the only characters that will match their animations in perfect synchronicity at the start of every mirror round, and that's something, I suppose. He has no close proximity normal variations as the majority of the cast does, and is tall enough that many of his attacks sail over the heads of some of the smaller characters like Ibuki and Chun-Li if they're ducking. Notable is his standing hard punch, which can slam an opponent to the ground in some instances. His standing hard kick bends him back just out of most characters' throw range unless attempted point blank, and will hit multiple times on a tall or jumping opponent and acts as an overhead. Pressing toward the opponent in medium punch results in a quick upward jab that can poke an enemy out of the air. This move changed from a haymaker in second impact. Towards and hard punch is this overhead move that hits low and complements his universal overhead. Both of these moves can be chained together for a target combo, but has limited practical use. His standing light punch and medium punch also target combo. Of course, if you've ever seen any footage of this character, you know him by his ducking hard punch, which is a 2-hit elbow up to the jaw. The second hit will launch the opponent into the air for a variety of follow-ups, which is the bread and butter of his offense. Getting into a situation where Urien can make the most out of this move is where his hidden complexity manifests. This move isn't perfect, it's very unsafe if blocked, so a player still needs to be judicious with its use, but the first hit can combo into his special moves and even his taunt, which, while not causing any damage, will knock an opponent over unless it's blocked low. The taunt will also passively boost attack damage. Urien is a character that makes the most out of juggling opponents, not unlike other Capcom fighting games like the Marvel vs. series or even 3D fighting game series like Tekken that had grabbed much of the attention of fighting game players by the time the Street Fighter III series began. His gameplay is all about finding sneaky and even cruel ways of popping an opponent into the air and keeping him that way. Some of his special moves continue to keep those on the receiving end in a falling juggle-ready state, and this will make for grossly damaging and at high level exceedingly flashy combos. Launching moves are all over this game, but Urien is unique in that much of his offense is built around it. The rest of it comes from his super arts, but we'll come back to that in a second. The chariot tackle is the major component in the launch combos. Perform with a backward charge and a kick button, the strength of the button determines the distance traveled in discrete frames of animation. I mentioned that last part because proper timing of the tackle after the launch can be linked together. The EX version will chain 2 tackles consecutively, which makes it easier for less experienced Urian players to obtain high damage in corner setups, and can even carry certain members of the cast from one corner to the next with proper timing. It's not completely safe, but it's an important part of his arsenal. The other is the dangerous headbutt, performed with a downward charge and a punch. The strength of the button determines the distance Urian hops, and players use this as either an anti-air move or a combo ender. The EX version will also act as a launcher and has a faster startup than his low hard punch. Often, sacrificing a portion of meter for a fast combo-ready punisher is worthwhile in his case. The hop gives this move more utility than many fresh Urian players realize, as it can be used in some of his sneakier setups. Between the low hard punch, the tackle, and the headbutt, we have all the pieces of Urian's most straightforward gameplay. His remaining specials have some utility though. The metallic sphere is a slow-moving projectile that's particularly wide, which is important. An opponent hit by it in the air will fall into a juggle state, so the added width and slow speed make it occasionally difficult to work around. It's performed with a fireball motion and punch button, and holding the button will chamber the shot until released. The strength of the button will also alter the angle of the attack, specifically to shoot down jumping opponents, but his recovery after this move is so long that a parried sphere will open him up to a lot of punishment. The EX version will also always travel horizontally and hits twice. Incidentally, the EX version was changed from Second Impact, where it was 2 spheres floating in sine wave patterns. His final special, the Violence Knee Drop, launches Urian upward for an aerial attack. It's performed with a downward charge and a kick button, the strength determining a fixed distance traveled. The EX version will home in on an opponent and hit twice. This isn't often used in high-level play though, as it can be easily reacted to for parries and punishes, so many players will employ it as an escape from being pinned into a corner, or for pushing opponents into specific spaces for some of the more complex combo setups. All of this talk about specific setups and complex combos revolve around Urian's use of one specific super art, the Aegis Reflector. Thus far, this video series has covered characters that may have one super that could be better than the rest, but which of the 3 that tends to be is debatable amongst players and against certain matchups with members of the cast. That was always part of the plan with the Street Fighter 3 games after all, to have choice and individualism in gameplay style. So more than one super art can be a viable option for players that know the game well. Urien, though, is the first character we've run into where one super art in particular towers over the rest, and has dictated his gameplay for the entirety of Third Strike's competitive life. The emergent gameplay born from creative use of this one move has become the second pillar for how this character's offense is built. He won't be the last character we'll see like this. But let me briefly go over the other 2 super arts first. The Tyrant Slaughter is certainly the most damaging as a raw attack. Essentially 5 chariot tackles with a knockdown ending, this is his least used super art if there has to be a hierarchy. Very few combo applications exist for this move, and since it can be blocked low or high, has no fireball invincibility like other similar supers, and can often leave Urien inconveniently on the other side of the opponent, the preferred second choice would be the Temporal Thunder. This is a gigantic metallic sphere that hits 5 times, causes a substantial amount of stun, and has very unconventional parry timing. The girth of this projectile makes it useful in more combo opportunities than the Tyrant Slaughter, such as juggling tackle combos. Still, both of these supers have medium to high meter cost, and while they hurt plenty on their own, have low overall damage potential. Finally then, there is the Aegis Reflector, the attack that defines this character. It generates a mirror that will reflect projectiles back to an opponent, even super arts, which may have been its intended use. Contact with a mirror causes damage though, so while that might not be particularly high, good use of screen positioning means that a Urian player can put their opponent into constant 50-50 scenarios, especially while cornered, which will downright bully a player on the receiving end. Better, the mirrors can be controlled upon activation to a small extent, giving the player more precision than most other supers in the game. The strength of the punch button used will send a mirror a fixed distance, but the mirror will slowly home in on an opponent within that distance, such as making it slowly retreat backward on a cornered foe. While the reflector itself takes half a second to materialize, he is vulnerable to throws or attacks that come out during the super flash. He's our first character that can utilize a sort of hidden super though, and that pressing 2 buttons to activate this move will toss out an upward mirror that solidifies faster. Urien by himself can be scary under the best circumstances. The Aegis Reflector makes him terrifying. Some of the normal moves that I haven't mentioned yet are good for his particular use of said screen position. His throws are damaging, a power bomb either toward or away from Urien, or chokehold if the stick is in a neutral position. Mashing the buttons during the choke will cause more hits, but the opponent can mash their own buttons to break the hold. The benefit isn't in the damage though, but in how it leaves the opponent close enough to Urien that an Aegis Reflector can be used for further pressure. Best of all, and you'll probably not be surprised to know this, is that Urien has an unblockable setup with the mirror. Knocking down an opponent mid-screen and tossing out an appropriately sized reflector, Urien can use the hop of his headbutt to get to the other side and push them back into the mirror with normal attacks, a stepping front kick performed by pushing toward the opponent and standing medium kick, or by simply walking into them in some cases. This isn't seen often in high-level matches, as a quick stand can roll the opponent out of immediate danger, and the damage inflicted won't often be a match ender. But it is an impressive use of his skill set. So impressive that Capcom actually patched it out of revisions of the CPS3 arcade board. Initial runs of the Japanese board had this unblockable setup, but the US version and further Japanese revision removed it in another similar situation with a different character. The hardcore community scoffs at these revisions though, and while you may only occasionally see these mid-screen shenanigans in fiercer tournaments, the original board with the unblockables is still the preferred way competitive third strike aficionados play this game even today. Yet there's still more to say about this super. While he can only stock up to 2 of them, the meter for this is only about medium size, meaning that a good Urien player can toss out a reflector and build up nearly enough meter from the follow-up combo that they can generate another mirror, which some players affectionately call the third reflector. Still more, usage of this move shows us 2 more somewhat obscure quirks of the Street Fighter III game's engine. First, some special attacks in this game have multiple input commands to activate, the chariot tackle being a great example. While still needing to briefly charge backward, this move can be executed by pressing toward with a kick or a half circle forward. This is significant because a player can properly combo a tackle into a super like the Aegis Reflector that way. Every character with a charge move can do this in Third Strike. The second is a more advanced tactic called charge partitioning. Essentially, a player can charge back on the stick for a move like a chariot tackle or a dangerous headbutt, but the built-up charge won't immediately disappear when pushing the stick in the other direction. It depletes, giving characters like Urian much more mobility than some may assume to use the rest of his charge time. Making good use of the charge partitioning takes practice and skill, and players using Urian can still be a threat without it, but at top level, charge partitioning is practically a requirement. But even though the lion's share of Urian players only use one super and work fastidiously to juggle opponents into the air, his gameplay, like his dressed-down appearance, is less straightforward than it seems. Though the Aegis Reflector is a powerful move, it's not entirely impossible to deal with, placing Urian in the upper tiers of the game according to the Third Strike tournament community, but not at the peak. Ironically, he's not a god, as we'll see in future videos, and suffers compared to a few other characters that routinely top tournament appearances. Like his backstory then, Urian is strong and has an understated complexity, but he'll always sit in the back seat.